Sure. Well, let's first start with the definition of a delusion. Okay, so a delusion is believing something is true in spite of the evidence that it's not. Okay, that you can have all the factual evidence that something isn't true, but you believe it. Okay, and then you did a very good job in terms of the difference that I talk about primarily in delusion or drug of choice and in cognitive behavior therapy in general. Delusions are really the neurotic delusions. Okay, and these are thought patterns that we buy into, that we still can function in life, but we have these belief and these thought patterns that influence our behavior and our perceptions of things. That is what the neurotic delusions are. That's kind of what we'll talk a little bit more about. The psychotic delusions, when people actually, it's impacting their day-to-day life, in spite of the facts, they're engaged and truly believe that their world is around that. Okay, and there's many different types in the book. They'll talk about them in terms of, having the God delusion that you're Jesus Christ, or having the delusion that, the government's spying on you. And that impacts then your whole existence and being. It becomes a reality instead of you understanding that it's just a belief. So that's the ones that many times there's medications and hospitalization. And that's the ones that you're talking about, that a lot of people, when they hear the word delusion, I'm delusional, that's what they're talking about. But in the book and in the process of what I do as therapy and how I help people look at their own life, it's the neurotic thought process and the beliefs that cause us to drive how we act and react to situations. We can even know in situations that is what we're doing, and people can point that out to us, but that belief is so embedded.
This is so important for us all to know. You have listed 9 of neurotic delusions in your book, and you talk a little bit about what they are. So I'd love for you to take some time to just go through those with us and give us some feedback on how we actually all probably fall into one of those 9 categories.
Okay, so they are in the book. It's on page 8 in the book. And I'm going to, if you don't mind, reference them, because remembering them all in my head is very different. But the all or none thinking, okay, I think we all have done, and I just did that, okay? We all have done, right? I just showed you an example of that. We go into our patterns that really, it's everybody. It's always. It's actually a black and white kind of thinking. The all or none is very similar to the black and white thinking. We have to put it in a category. Okay. So when we're in a situation and we're feeling hurt, everybody does that to me, or that type of kind of thinking that gets triggered. Why that gets triggered is very unique between our individuals. A situation can happen. Okay, an event can happen, and this always happens to me. That's again the very similar. Well, does it really always happen to you? I have a significant other that I tease him about his all or none black and white thinking all the time, because politically, when something happens, he immediately goes, "Well, all of them, everybody," and I'm going, some, not all.
Yeah.
And there's how our world. I mean, if we really want to look at it right now in our own world. The split that's happening in our country right now has a lot to do with that all or none black and white thinking. Yeah. Right? Yeah, and again, that all or none thinking protects some of these paradigms that I talk about in the book, because I talk about the basic delusions of shame, guilt, perfection, and control. These patterns of thinking, right? If we want to be in control, we would possibly use that all or none thinking, because it would help us narrow down what we're talking about, what we can control. The perfectionism delusion, wanting to be perfect, is that all or none. I'm only good if I'm perfect, if I have it all together. Well, who has it all together? I know I don't have it all together. Right? So the next one is the overgeneralization. And I'll just read this to you real quickly. It says the individual views things and situations in extreme terms, such as it will never happen. Again, that's that always, never, always, overgeneralizing. Okay, you take one experience and you base everything on that one experience.
Okay.
Okay. If you've had a couple of failures in your life, then you're just I'm always gonna fail. They're never gonna like me. Okay. Yeah. If you had a couple of failed job interviews, okay, I'm never gonna get that job. Right? Because now you're reacting to a feeling of disappointment. possibly. And again, all these different delusions are reactive thought patterns to discomfort, to uncomfortable emotions.
Okay. So it's kind of like we all basically fall into one of these categories, and it's how we react to whatever is happening in the current moment, but it also has to do with how we reacted to things in the past moment.
Absolutely, because you can go down the continuum and say, oh, where did that start? Oh, that started there, when I had this major disappointment in my life and I felt no one was there for me. So now I assume I'm always going to be alone. I hear that one a lot in relationships. I've had so many failed relationships. I'm always going to be alone. Yeah. I'm never going to find that person.
And that would be what we call overgeneralization.
That's right. So the next one is mental filter. The individual gets fixated on one or more negative thoughts. That is an interesting one. And that is something that is a hard habit to break, actually, because the mental filter is this, it becomes a core belief, that negativity. I talk about having an affair with that negativity.
Okay.
That it becomes such a part of you that it's hard to release yourself from that filter, from the way you see things. I know with people who struggle with depression, and specifically the dysthymic depression, and the dysthymic depression is that Eeyore character from Winnie the Pooh. Okay. Oh, well, this is the way it's gonna be. It's like they just hold on to that kind of low grade, this is my life, this is what's gonna happen. And that mental filter just is that negative belief that you can't get out of. And to try to get out of that belief sometimes is really hard because you have to change your response to discomfort.
Okay. Yeah, that does sound like a hard one. But it's encouraging to hear that we could break from that habit once we realize that we are doing that. Is that accurate to say?
Oh, that's more than accurate to say. I always tell people that I work with, the first step is identifying it, not changing it, but that's what I do. And the first step is, oh, I just did that. Not that I changed it. Oh, there it was. I just did that. Okay, now, once we can do that, there's a great little poem that is been used in the addiction field for years. And I talk a lot with habit shifting, especially the hard ones, okay? It's the story of this man who goes down a road. He walks down the road, he falls into this hole. Oh, look at me, I'm in this hole. And it takes him forever to get out of this hole. He feels like devastated that he falls in the hole. Okay, next week he goes down the street. He gets into the hole. He goes, oh, there was a hole. Okay. Oh, yeah, there it goes. But it takes a little bit more time, but he gets out. Next week he goes, oh, just about ready to go into that hole. There's that hole. I'm out quick. I got myself halfway in there. I'm out of that hole. Okay. Next week he goes down the thing. There's the hole. Okay. I'm going to walk around that hole. I'm not going to go in that hole. And then finally he decides to walk down another street.
Okay.
And that's the process of change. That's the kind of change you want. Because every step along the way, you're having awareness. You're breaking the habit. You're releasing yourself from maybe a mental filter.
Okay.
So discounting is like when you're in a situation, right? Especially a situation that maybe you're anxious about or whatever. Do you ever have anybody? I had this in my life when every time I tried to make a major change, like when I opened up a business, my spouse would say to me, oh my God, but you're going to lose your health care and you're going to do this and total focus on the negative. And I'm going to look at, but there are a lot of positives that are going to go on to that. And the negatives aren't the only picture. And I've got to trust. Yeah. I got to trust that the positives. And the discounting is only looking at the negative of the situation and letting that cloud create anxiety, because that's what happens. It creates anxiety and it can stifle the reality of the situation. When my spouse would do that to me, I'd say, yes, I've done it. How I would turn around is, look, this isn't my first time I've done this. I've done this before. Temporarily, I have to adjust that, but in the big picture, everything works out. I have more freedom. I have more time to myself. I have more creative energy. I can pursue things that so I start to look at all that.
Yes.
The tool that we use in counseling a lot with people is that we tell them to do the pros and cons list, right? Because when people get stuck in that discounting, the reality is if you can look at the pros, not just the cons, maybe you can flip it.
Yeah.
So that's a tool. That's a tool for that one.
Kind of reminds me of one that looks at the glass half full or half empty. Would you think that that has some kind of correlation? Like some people who look at the glass half empty is always doing that negative thinking, that discounting and thinking of the negative things. But then there are others that the glass is half full and we can look at the pros of that and try to go from there. Does that make sense?
Oh, that's a great analogy. Yes, that's another way to kind of use that, the half full, half empty kind of analogy. That's exactly it. But you got to watch that because sometimes there's, I get accused of this, by the way, excuse me, of the Pollyanna, that I'm always looking at the half full and I'm never looking at that half empty. It's like, so we got to be careful that we're not even on the other side, because you can have that Pollyanna that everything's wonderful too. It's like, you got to have that ability to look at both sides of a picture, but not let the negative side consume you. For that, because that's so jumping to conclusions, something happens and like somebody, and we all do this. Recently I did it, like I didn't get a text back from somebody quick enough, and I immediately thought that they were mad at me about a conversation I had earlier that day. And I had to say to my, like, Irene, I mean, aren't you just making assumptions and jumping to conclusions that, they're holding on to that? So I let it go. And sure enough, when I talked to the person the next time, they were just enmeshed in a lot of stuff, helping out a family member, and they couldn't get back to me. But initially, that's like, oh my God, this is the story. Okay. You start to create a story. If something happens, where does it come from? It comes from your anxiety. It could come from, your own guilt about a situation. It can come from some of those emotions that I talk about and the delusions that I talk about. I've had a patient in the past that as soon as she doesn't get the positive response she wants, she'll respond to, is there something I did wrong? What did I do wrong? Please tell me why you're answering me. Writing about making it about you. Making it about you sometimes causes that jumping to conclusions. There's Ruiz's book, The Four Agreements, that really helps with that thought shifting process. It talks about, it's not about you. Don't assume. Mm-hmm. Okay. And those are the triggers sometimes that relate to jumping to conclusions, because we're making these assumptions based on emotion. Again, not on fact, but based on emotion.
Yeah.
The magnification and minimization, the individual blows things out of proportion. That ties right into what I was talking to you about the jumping to conclusions. And the interesting factor about this as we're talking is, there's 9, but they all feed off each other. And when you start to look at these, you're going to find that there's one core one and it triggers some of the other ones, but there's that core one that you have to really work on. Like, in my own life, my perfection and control delusion, okay, it's that black and white, all or none thinking, and the shoulds in my life, which relate to judgment, self-judgment, and then, the judgment of others, right? So I could do tons of these at times, but if I really narrowed them down, that's where it goes.
There's a major.
Okay. Yeah, and that's the key when you start evaluating these neurotic delusions, right? Is like, what's my core? Where does it start? Like you taught, where did it start from? And now I've got to kind of use tools to come out of it. Humor is a great tool too, to come out of it. So these two, the jumping to conclusions and the magnification and minimization, can feed off each other.
Okay. Emotional reasoning.
All right. Emotional reasoning. The individual uses feelings to determine if something is true, fact or fiction. That is my tool that I tell people. Okay. It's like you're going to go down. I know a lot of people that I've worked with that come into therapy, but want to know why, the intellectualization of the problem. Okay. And it's like, okay, now just feel it, but they have a really hard time with that. And then the other side of the coin is that everything is based on what you feel. Okay. The feeling becomes the fact. Okay. So I feel that you do not like me. So you feel unliked. So now it becomes a fact that you are unliked. You feel you're unlikable. So you're just going to assume people don't like you. Okay. So that's kind of what happens.
The next one is a big one. And for those of you who are watching, I had the privilege of being part of a group that was run by Irene, and the should statements was really a big theme in that group. And so this is a big one. So talk to us about the should statements, Irene.
Okay. All right. So should statements. The individual engages in excessive self-criticism. Okay. So where does self-criticism come from? Self-criticism is unrealistic expectations of yourself. That comes from the perfection delusion that I talk about in the book, that that real belief. It's a hyper sense of responsibility. Somewhere in your life, you felt a hyper sense of responsibility. So you set these standards really high for yourself. Okay. And if you have to meet them, everybody should. My whole life should. So it becomes this paradigm of perfection. It puts a tremendous amount of stress and anxiety. It brings a lot of women to therapy. Okay, a lot of, because they set these expectations up, and then they get to certain stages in their life where they can't do it anymore. So it crushes them. They feel like a failure. They're trying to keep that perfect image going up, and so they start beating themselves up. So not only do they beat themselves up, they begin to, that's happened a lot during this pandemic. Okay. It's happened a lot, and it comes out of fear and anxiety. And with the pandemic, we've all had a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety. So we've had a really hard time being open and accepting how everybody is differently wanting to deal with this, right? They should be wearing masks. They should be keeping 6 feet apart. Everybody should get the vaccine. The big shift is could. I have a daughter who's amazing, and she struggles with some anxiety. And when she went off to college, she was dealing with trying to work through her anxiety, and she was seeing a therapist. She came home one day, and we were talking about something. We were talking about a plan that she was thinking about. And I said, you should try this. And she looked at me and she said, I could try that. I went, oh, she's throwing her therapy at me. And there's the habit, right? We automatically go with should when we think about that. That sounds like a pretty judgment statement. You should can trigger another person to feel like you're judging them.
Okay.
And should kind of relates to the right way to do it. You should do it this way, right? Which then triggers another person to feel judged, or triggers your own disappointment. I should have done that. How many times do you make a mistake and you say, I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of saying, I could have made another choice there. Do you see the difference in how you feel? I should have done that. Feels like a very critical parent. I could have done something different. Kind of opens me up to be self-accepting.
Right. It gives us
right. And to
think about it a little bit more.
Yeah. And it helps us not set ourselves up to feel like we have to be perfect.
Right.
Right.
Can you talk to us about the blame?
Sure. The individual takes responsibility for thoughts, feelings, and actions that may or may not have been within him or her own control. Okay, what does that mean? In other words, that means that I blame myself for what you did. Oh, it's my fault that, you made that decision. We do a lot with our kids. That's why we have a really hard time separating from our kids and really addressing some of the stuff, because if our kid makes a choice that doesn't help them right away, we feel like we failed as a parent. So not to feel like we failed, instead of kind of helping the kid to take responsibility for that choice, we go in and rescue them, and we attack the school or the situation instead of let the natural consequence of things happen. Yeah. So that sometimes can play into that. Like blame really has a way of deflecting your sense of disappointment.
That's really good. That is really good. It does have a way of doing that. That's really good. There's so much wonderful information. And again, the book is just wonderful. So to wrap up, Irene, I'd love for you to tell us why it's important for us to treat our personal delusions. Like, why is it important for us to know this and to treat them and to be aware of them?
Okay, so here's the deal with treating your delusions. Personally, for me, okay, when the reason why this whole book came about was I was living, I thought, in Florida, the perfect life, right? The picket fence life, 2 children, 2-point children. I had a cat, had a practice, had a husband. Everything looked perfect, but deep down, right. But deep down inside, there were a lot of disappointments, a lot of things going on in my life that really weren't true to me. I was so focused on the image that I was trying to create because I wanted to undo that from my childhood that I didn't have, that I really wasn't being honest and true to myself about really what was important. Was the house and the perfect kids and life looking perfect really thing? No, it wasn't. It was being true to the fact that the values, and my children helped me trigger that, because when I was trying, they were hitting the preteen ages in Florida, and I was noticing that the values that I was believing in were hard really to follow through on, because we were so wrapped up in the materialism of our life. Okay. And so that's what caused me to say, hey, the truth is, I want my kids to be honest, responsible, not be judge their feeling of okayness on what they have, but who they are. And that was my transition to Maine, because about Maine, I mean, the corny motto, the way life should be. When I would go to Maine, knowing that you can live in a trailer here or you can live in a fancy house there, none of that mattered. What mattered was when I moved to Maine and the ice storm happened, and I was only there with a single mom with 2 kids, and I was there for 4 months, and people were driving down the driveway to make sure we were okay.
Wow.
Okay. That was the value: caring, responsibility, honesty, living true to those things without it being distracted by the doing of my life. I remember a friend said to me, the busy Barbie world, right? You do instead of be in your life. So what ends up happening is, if you get wrapped up in your delusions, at times you're doing your life. You're not being in your life.
Wow.
And that was the core of my transition, to practice what I preach and to pass that on to people. And many times when people come to therapy, that's exactly how they're feeling. They're disappointed about something. No one comes to therapy because they're feeling good. Only people come to therapy when whatever is happening isn't working anymore.
Right.
and all of a sudden the reality that my life is empty. I'm doing this world, but am I actually in it and being in it?
That is so deep. That is so deep. And it's something that really we could all kind of listen to and look at and explore our own lives.
Well, I can give you an example of that. Just happened to me 2 days ago. I've been in Florida caretaking an ailing mother. So I've been wrapped up in the doing for 3 months. I had a checklist of all these things that had to be taken care of, and I was just going right through my checklist. Well, finally, last week, my checklist is almost done. I'm here alone right now, and I was feeling myself crashing. I was feeling myself finally decompressing. Okay. I had to, my final thing on there is to have to make some end of life arrangements for my mother. Okay. And take care of that. And it just hit me that I'm in this big transition in my life. I lost my husband 3 years ago. My mother is now on her last, whatever, maybe last year. Okay. My whole world is changing. My age, I'm turning 66. The pandemic actually has supported a big shift in the way I do therapy now, YouTubing, remote. So many changes are happening in my life right now. And I was doing it all, not feeling it. So I decided to breathe, and I decided to take my beach towel and go sit on the beach and just have the waves, listen to the waves, hear the birds. And I let myself cathartically feel everything. And I let the anger out and whatever emotions needed to come out. And then I had clarity. When that was over, I had this clear vision. I was able to sit down the next morning and map out, okay, this is this and this is that, and have closure with everything, because I tapped in to being there.
Yes.
Not doing what I was doing here for 3 months, but actually being here. And I can feel it right now in my heart. And it was the gift to myself. And that's the gift I try to help and give to others, is really the reason why you want to challenge these delusions. You want to be in your life. You don't want to do your life. You don't want to be my mother at 92. And because all she did was do her life, cook, clean, and she did not be in her life. At this stage in her life, she's sitting alone in a room, just staring out a window. I don't want that for me at 92. And I don't want that for anybody else.
Yeah. That's so touching and it's so amazing, Irene. I mean, viewers, just it's a perfect note to wrap up on. Are you being or are you doing? It's amazing to sit and reflect on that. And as you're speaking myself, like it's touching me to even think over that. And it's amazing. So I do appreciate that. We're going to have another video, Irene, and viewers. And in our next video, I know your book talks about the perfection, control, guilt, and shame delusion. And in reading your book, I thought that's so deep and that is so in depth that I just want to give its own time to its own video for that, because I can see where these neurotic delusions just really fit into that perfection, that control, that guilt, and that shame delusion. So for those of you who are watching, again, remember to subscribe and to like. And Irene also has an email if you have any questions on how to get her book or anything that she has said in these videos. I have the privilege to know her personally, and she loves to share the knowledge that she has. She loves to make people better with all the experiences that she has. So I so do appreciate that. Can you tell us how we can get a copy of your book?
Absolutely. In the last video, I mentioned that you can go to Amazon. Well, that no longer is an option for many reasons. The best way to get the book is to send me an email at thoughts282@gmail.com. Request the book. The book is $15, and the cost that I have, the expense to mail it out to you is $8. So it would be about $23 total that you would have to pay for the book. If you are in the area of MDI, Mount Desert Island, you can walk into Help the Self. There's books there. You can ask for a copy and they would collect the $15 and you can get a direct copy that way. And those are the two ways that you can get the book.
Again, I so thank you for your time, and I cannot wait to just sit and chat with you some more. Again, this is the book that we are talking about, Delusions, a Drug of Choice, and it is so full of just all types of information that we all can relate to personally. So I thank you, Irene, and I cannot wait to do this again.
Okay, well, have a wonderful day.
Bye now.